them. For example, whether it's technical assistance or access to finance. We know all of us that mostly access to finance is always topping the list when it comes to challenges to private sector development, especially small entrepreneurs like the ones that are mostly growing or startups. It's really hard for even them to get, for example, financing from commercial banks. It's pretty much hard for the commercial banks to really give out loans to these startups. So these events open up to a lot of entrepreneurs to understand what is existing out there, what opportunities can they tap or utilize. And one of which, for example, is the instrument that UNDP is doing, what we call the Growth Accelerator Entrepreneurship Challenge, whereby the objective is for startup companies to access grant finance and technical assistance as they accelerate and grow their businesses. So as UNDP, we do have this instrument which now is open to post-revenue startup entrepreneurs so that they can access up to $40,000 in grants and technical assistance, which is provided in form of coaching and mentorship as we're working together with our partners, mHub and Growth Africa. So yeah, that's just one of the opportunities that are there. And let me invite already the entrepreneurs that are here that in the next 2 or 3 months will be opening another window for a round of competition where entrepreneurs will be able to submit their proposals and ideas for them to access the financing. The whole idea of having this kind of instrument, for example, from UNDP, and maybe other players that also have such kind of instruments to support young and ambitious post-revenue startups, is about supporting SME development in the private sector in general, so that we can have a vibrant private sector that is able to even create jobs and introduce new products to the market. That's our idea about all these other instruments. So today, as we'll be hearing from the panelists around human resource related issues, let's focus and listen more to it, because they will touch more on maybe issue of motivation and other skills and how you treat your staff as you run your businesses. So it's a call to making things work around entrepreneurship development. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Titus, for that. So maybe let's start with Posta.
Hi, sorry, Yolanda. I didn't. I think I missed what you were saying there.
Yeah, I think my internet was slightly unstable. I was just asking the partner representatives on the call to introduce themselves before I bring in our first speaker for the evening.
All right, cool. Yeah, so I think just on top of what Titus was saying, so as far as implementing partners on Growth Accelerator goes, there's Growth Africa mHub. So on our end, as far as Growth Africa goes, our team consists of myself, Posta Chikaoneka, there's my colleague Oganiva Jingagule, and then we also have a colleague of ours who's based in Kenya, Esther Nyoncho.
Okay, I think Posta has introduced the whole team there. So let's get right into it. So one of the reasons that we organize this call is to touch on a very interesting subject, and a subject that has been shared by some of the entrepreneurs that we work with. And also we noticed that other entrepreneurs in the ecosystem have been struggling with, and that is how to handle their employees. And we, as a program, decided to bring in an authority who works in the area and who is in charge of the legal and ethical procedures regarding employees. And this is why on the call today, we do have a representative from the Ministry of Labor. We have the Deputy Labor Commissioner, Mr. Wafwile Musukwa, and he will be sharing with us a presentation that really looks at what are the legal aspects of dealing with your employees during COVID-19. So Mr. Musukwa, the floor is yours. Please feel free to share your screen. I know that you have a presentation for us, and we should be good to go. I see you've started your video. Are you able to start your audio?
My apologies, I will not be able to share my screen, but my presentation is very short. I think the participants will be able to get my presentation later. Sorry that I didn't share my presentation area to you.
Okay. May I please ask that you adjust your camera so that we're able to see your face? And
can I be seen now?
Maybe you adjust your screen, like if you tilt it downwards. There we go. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Perfect. So yes, I give you the floor now.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Yes. Once again, my name is Wafwile Musukwa, and I'm from the Ministry of Labor, where I work as Deputy Labor Commissioner. So my focus will be on labor, on employees, the impact of COVID on enterprises in as far as the issue of labor or employees is concerned. As I said, my presentation is quite brief because I'm expecting questions from you since most of you are employers, and therefore you are going through so many issues, and I expect you to ask me questions so that I clarify. Well, by way of introduction, business has been hit hard by the COVID pandemic. Business has slowed down, resulting in cash flow challenges, and wage bills have become difficult to manage, and the temptation to compromise on benefits paid to employees has become very high. That's the experience that we have as a ministry that is responsible for enforcing employment and labor laws and providing advice to employers and employees. The pandemic continues to ravage the world, and it cannot be predicted with certainty as to when it will be put under control. And in such circumstances, we know business planning becomes a challenge. Let us look at the characteristics of labor or employees. Labor is one of the three factors of production, and the others being land and capital. I know nowadays a fourth one is being added, entrepreneurship. The reason being that you really need to have skill in order for you in business and remain in business, to do business and remain in business. Labor is different from the other factors of production in the sense that it enjoys numerous rights, including human rights, some of which have been enshrined in the Constitution. For example, Section 31 on fair and safe labor practices. We have the issue of fair remuneration, issue of the right to join a trade union, issue of non-discrimination, and the right to go on strike. Because of these rights, one has to be very cautious when handling labor. Because when we talk of human rights, they are very rigid. One characteristic of human rights is that you acquire a human right by birth, by being born a human being. That human rights are universal. So whether in Malawi, in America, everyone has to enjoy human rights. You can't, for example, give an excuse of low levels of development or contravening or violating human rights. That is unacceptable. And also that human rights are inalienable. You can't separate them from a human being. And this will become important later, I think when I'll be going towards the end. At global level, we have the International Labour Organization that sets standards on labor protection. And Malawi is a member of the ILO. It has also ratified and domesticated a number of these international instruments, for example, those on minimum wage, on non-discrimination, on freedom of association and safety and health, just to mention a few. According to the ILO Declaration of 1944 Declaration of Philadelphia, labor is not a commodity. So labor is not subject to principles of supply and demand. You can't play around with labor the way you play around with commodities. So if there is an oversupply of tomatoes, then the prices will go down. But with labor, ILO and our laws say that you have to pay at least minimum wage. Can't go below the minimum wage, or you pay what has been agreed. The fact that there are so many workers around does not mean you have to reduce the pay of someone. Let us look at the labor protection role of the Ministry of Labor. The ministry derives its mandate from the following laws. We have the Employment Act, which provides for minimum standards, such as minimum wage, annual and maternity leave, maximum hours of work, and so on. We also have the Labor Relations Act, which provides for freedom of association, that employees have a right to join or form trade unions. We have the Occupational Safety, Health and Welfare Act, which sets minimum health and safety standards, and the aim is to safeguard the well-being of the employees. So the Act plays a preventive role. We have the Workers' Compensation Act, and this is applied in the event that issues of safety and health have failed to protect people, and then someone gets injured or dies, then compensation has to apply. We also have the Pension Act, and which makes pension mandatory, and this is to enable someone to have an income in old age when they are too weak to work, to engage in economic activities. So basically, labor laws set minimum standards, and because of that, they are inflexible. As I said, most of the labor rights are actually human rights, and the human rights are not subject to compromise. However, the good thing is that we are aware that small and medium enterprises face particularly serious challenges. And for this reason, we have a section in the Employment Act, Section 15, which provides that labor officers, when conducting inspections, should be very considerate when they go to such smaller and informal enterprises. We need to assist them in complying with the law. And by this, I do not mean that the minimum standards have to be compromised. So if, for example, an employer has been paying wages or salaries below the minimum wage, we will ask that employer to pay arrears over a period of time, and not immediately like a big enterprise. It is in the context of this Section 15 that the ministry developed COVID-19 workplace guidelines. And then what are the measures that are in place to minimize the impact of COVID-19 on businesses? What has the ministry done? Well, the ministry has developed COVID-19 workplace guidelines, which were adopted in April 2020 to offer guidance to businesses. The measures in these guidelines emphasize on dialogue. And the reason for this is that there are so many aspects which, if implemented by the employer without consulting the employees, would actually amount to a violation of the law. So, for example, if an employee was getting a salary of 80,000 per month, and the employer says business has slowed down, facing cash flow challenges, I can't afford, the employer cannot unilaterally reduce the wages. The employer should engage the employees so that they understand. And once agreement is reached, then you can sign, and that will be acceptable according to the law, as long as the wages, the salary does not come below the minimum wage. So the guidelines, for example, advise that wage cuts through engagement of employees is possible. Changing work schedules, for example, reducing hours of work or even number of days is possible, and that would also automatically reduce the wages or salary, because if you read the definition of wage is paid for service rendered or to be rendered. So the ministry's understanding is that if services are not rendered, then why should someone be paid for doing no work? The guidelines also recommend the granting of annual leave even before the agreed dates, in the hope that after the annual leave, and that was our expectation then during the first wave of COVID, that it would go within a few months. So we recommended, and we still recommend, that people can go on annual leave. And then also there is a recommendation on obtaining loans to sustain business, although the ministry doesn't facilitate that, but we have other government institutions that do that. And also very, very important, getting more innovative. For some, particularly those who are in trading, you can change products by actually selling products, that have whose demand has gone up because they are being used in a way to address the COVID challenges or to address the COVID pandemic. And even the way of doing business, instead of sending people to go around, distribute products, maybe you can simply be making phone calls and using other forms of modern communication. The law also provides as a measure of last resort for retrenchment, where the employer cannot manage the wage bill. But this usually comes in as a measure of last resort. And in all these, social dialogue, or just dialogue, is very much emphasized. And dialogue sometimes can help you to get ideas from your employees on how to on certain things. I hope my 15 minutes is over. Let me stop here and hand over to the Director of Ceremonies, but I'll be able to share the COVID-19 guidelines that we developed. And in case some of you also don't have the COVID-19 rules that were gazetted. We also have a few provisions, a few issues from the COVID guidelines. So I'll be able to share those two documents. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mr. Musukwa, for your presentation. I think you have mentioned a couple of resources there that the people on this call will be interested in receiving. So when you do share them, please note that I will be emailing those that are on the call and sharing with them his presentation and also some of the resources that he referred to. I can see that a couple of people have already started asking questions in the Q&A. Thank you so much. Please continue taking down some of those notes and asking the questions. We are going to quickly move on to our next speaker for this evening. As we said, we are going to take all the questions at the end of the two presentations. So our next speaker is going to have more of a softer touch on how to deal with HR issues. She's really going to look at the communication aspect and how as business owners we can effectively manage the relationship with our staff. So looking at issues of employee motivation and communication. So our next speaker is the founder of AI Consult Africa. She's also an executive coach and transformative impact strategist. And she's also one of the mentors here with us at the Growth Accelerator program. Her name is Maria Mhandire. Maria, I know that you are on the call. If you're able to switch on your mic, and please let me know if you're able to share your screen. I think you informed me before that you have a presentation. Great.
Oops. Where have I gone? Okay, here I am. Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Yolanda and the Growth Accelerator team for giving me this opportunity to have a conversation that I think I've been having with a lot of social entrepreneurs and other organizational leaders throughout this period as we grapple and try to make sense of this crisis that we find ourselves in. I've also learned quite a bit from Mr. Musukwa's presentation, so thank you very much. And I look forward to also getting some of those resources. I think it's good that we have a framework within which we can make decisions and understand our legal obligation as far as our obligation to staff members from a labor perspective and also from an occupational health and safety perspective as well, because it's one thing to be worried about being able to pay people. We also need to worry about making sure that we're working in ways that keep our people safe. So I'm just going to share my screen. Yolanda, if you can tell me whether you can see, I've got quite a few things on my desktop. Before I do that, let me just make sure I'm on the right slide. Yeah, so here we go, and then I share. So are you able to see my presentation now?
Hi, Maria. Yes, we're able to see your presentation.
Okay, great. So I just want to wind us a little bit back. So to give us a sense of the context from which we're coming before we sort of dive into how do we handle those difficult conversations. So we're really thinking about how do we lead as business owners, leaders of organizations in crisis, and particularly with a focus on teams. And there are a number of factors that we need to keep in mind. There's obviously our legal obligations with reference to labor. We have to keep that in mind. We also have to think about the well-being and the welfare of our people vis-a-vis the well-being and the welfare of the business and our positioning in the marketplace. So how do we employ some smart people strategies that are winning for me, the business owner, and winning for the people that have helped me to grow the business? And then a final thing that I think is less often talked about is how do we maintain our values in crisis? Often when we are faced with a crisis, I think we go into what we would call survival mode. So the first and instinctual thing is, how do I get through this? How does my business get through this? How do my children and I survive through this? And we tend to then be very inwardly focused on ourselves, but then perhaps we in the process of trying to survive, we can sometimes compromise the values that are part of, that enshrine who we are and how we operate as a business. So those are critical things to keep in mind when we're thinking about how do we lead in crisis. This is kind of, just to give us, I think, a bit of a pictorial image. This is kind of how I think most of us can relate to this way of operating. We've been trying to do the best we can, social distance, wear masks. Some of us are working remotely. Some of us, unfortunately, initially, and maybe up until now, have had to close or minimize or limit some of the services that we offer. So those are the realities that we're dealing with. And most of us, the balance sheets, the cash flow statements are not looking very inviting, but soldier on we must. So this is what we're faced with. We've got higher physical risk, higher operational risks, as well as financial risks. So how do we manage our operations? How do we organize ourselves and restructure to be able to make all of these things work? And who is at the center of this? It's our people. So where can we, thinking about things like whether we can even work at all. How do we work? So how do we design around this new system that exists? And then the key thing is internally, who can we work with internally? If you have a team of 20 or 15 or 10 people, and you now have to think about how to reorganize that team. So who can you work with? And how can you re-engage with the people you're working with? And how will we work together going into the future? And those are some of the difficult conversations that we have to have. And sometimes it's beyond just having the conversation. It's also having time and space and the ability as the business owner and the leader to think about what are the strategies I'm going to use to move this business forward. And having that, then you have a basis upon which to have a conversation. But if you don't have a plan, and if you don't have a strategy, and you don't see how the business can move forward, it's very difficult to bring your team together and say, this is what we're going to do. So having a strategy on how to adapt appropriately is very important, and how to sustain the viability of the business, because we have less accessible markets in terms of both supply and trade. Some of us are producing goods or reselling goods that we have to import from outside the country. Those supply chains, for the most part, I think at the earlier part of the crisis, were disrupted. Some of us will have less active customers. So we may still have customers, but they're not buying as much, or they're not patronizing us as much. And we have fewer financing opportunities. So I was glad to hear from Mr. Musukwa that there are some strategies and some places we can go within the government structures to figure out how to refinance businesses that are facing cash flow challenges during this crisis. So that's sort of just to give us a context of, these are sort of the many different balls that are sort of in the air for you, for the business owner and the business leader, things that they have to figure out while keeping people at the center of what they're doing, and being able to be as transparent and as open as possible to give people a sense of security and safety, even though we're in the middle of the crisis. So what are some of the considerations you need to make as far as people and your teams are concerned when looking at this crisis? First of all, thinking about the size of your team, which has an impact on the size of your payroll, and how that looks juxtaposed to your cash flow. And what are some of the things that you would need to be able to do, thinking about that. But it's not only just about looking at the size of the team, but also the skills that the team have and the fit. There are some skills that you're going to continue to need going forward. And there are some skills that you're going to need to adapt. And then you're going to have some team members that have a wider breadth of skills, and therefore they can multitask more easily than others. Then there are other skills that are more specialized. Then there are some skills that are more critical to the business at this point in time, and others that are less. So it's really about looking at all of those factors and saying, what is the best fit for the business right now? And what will be the best fit for the business as we walk into the recovery stage out of this crisis? And then looking at all of that holistically and saying, who are the people that I need to keep? Who are the people that I need to reduce hours for? And unfortunately, sometimes you may have people that you need to let go. But how do you do that in ways that work both for the person that's being let go, in a way that is respectful and that also meets up with the obligations that you have in terms of exiting employees? But also, how does how do you make those decisions in line with what your business needs now and what your business is going to need in the future? So all of those things are really critical to keep in mind. So it's not just a matter of looking at your payroll and your wage bill and saying, right, I think my wage bill is X, I need it to be Y. So I'm just going to indiscriminately figure out, I'll look at the person earning the higher salary and that's the person I'm going to exit first. It doesn't quite work like that. At least if you want your business to go in continually, you have to make a lot of other considerations. Obviously, you have to look at contracts, your contract types and your legal obligations. That's a factor that you look at now when you're now thinking about your people matrix. Then, you have to look at the talent scoping, that in a year's time, this crisis may not be as bad as it is now. What is the talent that I'm going to need to move the business forward? Or what is the talent that I'm going to need to keep and cultivate over time? And so taking that and keeping that in mind as you decide how you're going to engage with the people that work for you in order for both of you to come out on the other side of this crisis okay. And why this is important is because although, and Mr. Musukwa said this really well, just because there are a lot of people that are looking for jobs in the market doesn't mean that there are a lot of people who are the right fit for your business in terms of talent, in terms of skills, etc. I do a lot of work around talent, and one of the hardest things to do is to find the right people to fit roles in different types of organizations. And one would think with the high levels of unemployment that we always read about, it would be very easy to find people to fit into roles and where there are gaps and so forth. But it's not as easy as that. And some of our businesses are a little bit complex. Some of our processes are unique. The way we manufacture, the way we do things, the certain way that we do them is very unique. And to get people that you're going to be able to retrain and get them to the level of experience that your current team has may take a lot of time, and you may not have the luxury of that time. So there are a lot of factors, a lot of things that we need to think about when we're looking at the people matrix. But one of the core things that it's all hinged on is the focus must be on communication. Engage, engage, engage. And in fact, in situations of crisis, you're better off over-engaging than under-engaging. So communications need to be timely so that you don't allow time for anxiety and speculation. Your staff mustn't be meeting at the water cooler or at the corridors and outside in the car park, talking about what do you think is going to happen next week? Do you think we're going to get paid? All of those kinds of things. It shouldn't be speculative. So it's important that we are communicating as openly and as honestly and as frequently as possible so that we avoid anxiety and speculation. Our communications also, it's important that the communications are clear, honest, and transparent so that we're telling really people as much as we can tell, because obviously there's some things that you can't really divulge. Sometimes you don't have all the information. Sometimes your patterns of trade are up and down. So you don't really have a clear picture that you can paint to people and say, team, this is the way it is, this is how it's going to be, and this is what we're thinking about. But at least give people some information. Give people at least some information. And as a business owner, I think most of us, you wouldn't be successful entrepreneurs if you weren't tracking and you don't have metrics that show you how your business is doing, what your customer trends are, and so forth and so on. And to engage the team in those conversations. Another important thing about engaging in those conversations is also a way of soliciting solutions and ideas from the team, because just because you have the idea to start business doesn't mean that you have keep the business floating in crisis. You've done a lot of ideas that you can actually get from your team when you lay the cards on the table. You say, team, this is where we are. What is it that we can do? What can we do about our product profile? Maybe we need to sell less of this and more of that. What can we do about our service portfolio? What can we do to keep our customers closer to us? What maybe, we've got different types or different definitions or different descriptions of customers, different types of customers rather. So which are the customers that we need to be focusing on? How can we engage more? Perhaps we all need to become salespeople and we are all on the phone every day, making sure that we call at least 10 prospective clients so that we are actually selling? Do we need to look at our pricing? What are our competitors doing on the market? So there are all those ideas that you can allow the team to engage, in, so that they feel productive and feeling like they're part of the solution, but also that you are in it together. You're creating that cohesion where we're in this together, we're working together to find the solutions. And then it's important that you follow up and update often as things evolve. So if you're going to be doing a monthly update, a weekly update, whatever the case may be, ensure that you're giving that information and you're either having those town halls. Most of our businesses are small enough that we can afford to gather everybody together, if not physically, but at least online, to be able to have that update, whether it's an hour or so, tracking and creating some transparency. Sometimes we don't share the data of our business because we feel like, oh, well, if the employees know that this is how much money we're making, they'll ask for more money. But sometimes in the crisis, it's good to show your sales data. Even if you're not showing revenue figures, you can show units of products. So, when business was okay, the 2020, we had an average of so many units sold per day. Now in COVID, we've got so many units, so our downturn is this. Then we can track it week by week to see how we're moving. Are we selling more? Are we selling less? And so forth. So that type of dialogue is very helpful, so that even if you do have to make the difficult decisions of maybe sending people on partially paid leave or negotiating salary reductions and all of that kind of stuff, there's a backdrop, there's a background that people are aware of, and they understand where it's coming from. They understand that, well, you're not being a selfish business owner and keeping your lump of profits that you've always had and cutting back on all the other expenses to meet the differences in the cash flow, but you're actually spreading the impact across everybody, including yourself, so that a fair outcome comes along. So that is very important. So the key thing in this is communication, communication, and communication. Now, how do you handle difficult conversations? Because it's one thing to say, yeah, just communicate. Communication is the best thing. But it's important to think about how do you approach these conversations. And some of my tips for managing difficult conversations, first of all, make peace with the message that you're going to communicate. So if you're going to give bad news or difficult news, for you, the communicator, you, the leader, you first have to make peace with it and be clear about, okay, this is not going to be easy, but this has to be said or this has to be done. Align whatever you're going to say or do with your own values and the values of the organization. That's really, really important. So really taking it through that stress test. Is this fair? Is this the best way to do it? Is there any way that the impact of this can be minimized on the most vulnerable people in this business, in this organization? Is there any way that this can be done differently? And when you've gone through that whole process and you're clear and you've made peace with your message, then it makes it easier for you to communicate it. Commit to telling the truth. So you need to resist the temptation to make emotion or compassion-driven unrealistic promises. So if you're going to send people on leave indefinitely, don't say, but maybe next month, by next month, I'm sure things will be okay. Don't make promises like that. It's very, very important that you commit to telling the actual truth, not sugar-coated. And then the final tip I'll give is expect emotion and prepare for it. There's no one who's going to be told that their hours are being reduced and their salary is being reduced and they're going to be like, yay, this is exciting. No, a lot of it is going to be very difficult for people to take on board. So expect that there's going to be emotion and prepare yourself for it. So that's how you prepare yourself. And what are some of the tips for them, the people receiving the message? How do you make sure that you are also preparing with your team in mind? One is to be clear and concise when you're delivering the message. So one of the hardest things in the middle of a crisis is to go to a management meeting as a staff member, and you expect to hear information, and you come out of that meeting thinking, what did they just say? Are we being fired? Are we not being fired? Our salaries, what are they really saying? So it's important to be clear and concise so that people really understand what is being said. The second thing is to answer questions directly and as honestly as possible. So if you're asked, what does this mean? Does this mean that if business carries on like this, we might lose our jobs? If the answer to that is yes, you say, unfortunately, that may be a reality, but in the meantime, we're going to do everything that we can with your help and everybody hands on deck to try and make sure that that doesn't happen. But it's important to be very direct when answering the questions. Again, expect them to have emotional reaction and prepare for that. Create an open dialogue system so you can get feedback and input as the process goes along. And then acknowledge the impact that some of your decisions some of the business's decisions are going to have on the team, and show empathy. It's important that people, your team members, know that it's as difficult for you to deliver this difficult message as it is for them to receive it, and that you're showing that empathy and you're showing that support. It's very, very important. Resist the temptation to hide behind emails and memos. So try and engage directly. These are conversations that need to be had directly. And sometimes you need to engage with people one-on-one. I think there's also a space for engaging with people communally, where you have a town hall, you gather everybody together and have the wider conversation, and then have individual conversations where specific contracts or specific roles are going to be impacted. I think that's very, very important. One of the things we need to remember is that how we treat people in a crisis is a deep reflection of the organization itself and a reflection of you as the leader. So how you exit your staff from the organization, it sends a stronger message to the people remaining than to those that are actually exiting the organization. So it's important that we uphold integrity, openness, and professionalism, so that you don't plant seeds of negativity within the team that remains behind. And that also means with integrity is that you're telling people the truth. And the integrity is not just about the words that you speak, but the actions that you take. So it won't make sense, for example, that you, the CEO, has just bought yourself a brand new SUV, and then you're having a conversation with the staff to say, oh, sorry, there's no money in the business to pay people, so I'm letting people go. There's no congruence in that. So we need to also be cognizant and sensitive to the fact that your behaviors and the actions that you take will have an impact on how the message is received. And then we mustn't forget as well that the people who handle your customers every day, who sell the products every day, who do the accounting, they know how much money comes in and how much money is going out. So if the business has suffered, maybe a minimal loss, but it's not big enough that people need to be let go, trust and believe that the staff will know that actually, yeah, business has gone a little bit down, but it's not that bad, or business has gone a little bit down, but we have reserves. We've been making in excess of profit for 4 years now. So we've made a loss for 3 months and suddenly everyone needs to be fired, or everyone needs to get a pay cut. You know, so integrity is important there. Even if you are going to have pay cuts, then it must be across the board, including you. Because ultimately, the rest of the team, they're building value for you in your business. They don't have equity. All they have is a salary. You might miss out on a salary, but you still have equity. This business belongs to you, or at least you're a major shareholder in the business. So the value, whatever value the business generates and whatever it grows into, you still retain ownership of that. So I think we need to have those human sensitivities and remember all those things and think about how best can we navigate these difficult spaces in ways that make sense. And in some organizations, I've had some clients I've worked with who have actually put it forward to the team to say, we've got this option, we can let people go, or we can cut everybody's hours. So everybody gets a pay cut of X%, and then everyone gets to keep their job. Or we look at positions and we look at which ones are the critical positions right now, and then we do that. And there's times where teams have come back and say, we'll all take a pay cut, as long as it means everyone gets to keep their job. Obviously, you won't always have the luxury to have those kinds of, that kind of flexibility, but this is just an example of ways that you can engage the challenge, the problem, in ways that also empower your staff members, and don't make them victims of, of circumstances. Obviously, it's beyond your control, but it's beyond their control as well. So how do you find ways that work for everybody so that you are then able to move forward. And even for those that you do exit, it's important that we keep in mind, remember we talked about earlier, I think I'll just beam the slide back again, this issue of talent scoping. There may be people that need to be let go in the short term, but that maybe you'll need to re-engage with in the long term. So how those people are treated also is highly impactful in terms of whether you're going to be able to re-engage at a later time or not. Or even when you send people on unpaid leave or on a sabbatical, partially paid sabbatical, it has an impact on whether they'll take another job with someone else and not come back. And so having those really deep, honest, direct conversations and negotiating from a place of integrity and then building solutions together. But I'll also say this, it's one thing to build solutions together and to negotiate. I think there's a room for that. But as the leader, I think it's important that you have a solution crafted, which is your sort of last bench position, that you know that ultimately, all said and done, whatever compromises we have to make, this is the position that we have to get to so that we're able to sustain our obligations. So that's really, really important in terms of, you know, how you approach having those difficult conversations and negotiating and discussing with your team. I just want to mention one other technical thing I think that perhaps hasn't been mentioned so far. Whatever types of negotiations you do, it's very, very important. I just want to bring a point here, just on my left side. In all situations, it's important that internal policy and internal stakeholder engagements and things like that are not skipped as you try and respond to the crisis. So if it means that you have to engage your board and they sit down, have an emergency meeting to ratify some of those decisions, then do that. Because that can become a legal loophole that comes back to haunt you. Because there are certain changes, certain roles, certain things that you need to do. You have internal policy and processes that guide how you're going to do things over and above the broad law. You know, we've got the Employment Act, the Labor Relations Act, and all of those legal instruments that offer us the framework within which we operate. But also internally, we have a framework. So if there are consultations that need to be done, so it's not only your team that you consult, but it's also all the other stakeholders, and ensure that the necessary sign-offs are there. And I'm saying this because I had to, at the tail end of last year, support some clients dealing with some legal issues because they had made decisions, skipped internal protocols, the internal protocols which staff members are fully aware of, and they leveraged that to have a legal, you know, to take a legal position against their employer because they hadn't followed due process. So it's ensure that as you negotiate, you do all of these things, ensure that you're following the proper authorized processes for internally for you organizationally, the ones you've laid out for yourself, and also that those are aligned with the rules of the law. So make sure that you're writing these things down. If you're having meetings, make sure you're taking your minutes. If you're changing contracts, make sure that you're writing all of those things down in writing and ensuring that you get official agreement to whatever things whatever decisions or compromises that you agree on making. So I think I'll stop there, and maybe I think the moderator said that we'll take questions after. So yeah, I think I'll close with this little quote from Robert Collier, and he says, "Sooner or later comes a crisis in our affairs, and how we meet it determines our future happiness and success. Since the beginning of time, every form of life has been called upon to meet such crisis." And I think this is one of those situations where all of us globally have to rise to the occasion and respond and create a new normal. And hopefully we can do that successfully. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria, for this very informative and very practical presentation. I can see from the chat box that a number of people have actually enjoyed this very well. Let me just recognize a few people who are commenting. All right. had a few who were sticking out. Fanny Gondo was appreciating Mr. Musukwa's presentation, looking forward to the labeled documents gazetted on COVID-19. Thank you so much for sharing that. I had Fanny Gondo also said that comment from Maria's presentation, communication is indeed key. Thank you, Maria. Nice presentation. I hope this will be sent to everyone after this meeting. This is from Wonge. And a few others. I'm reading out these comments, giving a chance to those that would like to type their questions to input them in the Q&A, and then we will definitely dive into that session. Another comment here, very impressive and informative presentation. This is awesome. So many lessons taken. Thank you, Maria. This is from Lumbani. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts there. We had another from Madalito Malinga saying that part where an employer buys an SUV, big mistake. Thank you so much for sharing those sentiments. Patience Silungwe, keeping our values as an organization in crisis. Very insightful presentation as always, Maria. All right, great response from everyone on the call. Thank you so much for being able to share your thoughts. And let's dive right into the Q&A section that we have here today. I'll call upon the panelists and maybe the Growth Accelerator team if any questions are coming your way to step up and answer them. So let's start off with a question from Tina Chimuzu. How can we transition employees from full-time to part-time employment? What are the legalities and factors that need to be considered? I think this one will be directed towards Mr. Musukwa. Hello, Mr. Musukwa, are you available? Okay, I see that you have actually answered the question in type. So allow me to just read that out, and maybe if you have any further clarification, you can unmute yourself and answer this question. But the answer to Tina's question is, you have to terminate first the more favorable contract and then engage afresh those who wish to continue working for you under the less favorable contract. This is from Mr. Musukwa. We also have another question from Jean Pankuku. And the question is, what is the best way of dealing with a case where business has gone down in terms of production volume, and that the employees are having to work 50% of their working time in terms of wages and salary payment? Mr. Musukwa, are you able to answer that one live?
Sorry, I had some challenges, although I think I responded. Can you come again with the question?
Okay, yes, I see a written response from you that says, you need to first and foremost to engage the employees so that they understand the situation of your business and further explain to them what wages mean. What wages are paid for work done or to be done. Hence, if one does not work and will never make for the time they have not worked, it does not make business sense to pay, because employees actually make their own salaries through their labor. If you reduce wages without consulting employees, courts are likely to declare that as an unfair labor practice, because benefits being paid to someone are treated as a right and can only be reduced with consent of the employee's consent. All right, I think that was a very elaborate answer to that. I know we also had a question that says, are the guidelines available for everyone to access them. My assumption is that these are the COVID-19 guidelines. And Mr. Musukwa says they should be available on the government website. And also, I think you'll be sharing a copy with me and I'll be able to email all of you. Another question here is, what is the current minimum wage? The current minimum wage, it's also been answered in type. I'll read it out for the benefit of everyone on this call. It is 1,923 kwacha per day. And if you pay monthly without considering how many working days there are in a month, it is roughly 50,000 Malawi kwacha. This wage rate became effective from the 1st of January 2021. Okay. And we do have another question here. I think the legal aspect is very important for this call. I do not know whether my question was already answered since I joined a bit late, but my question is, in the COVID-19 era, employees do not give 100% contribution because there's a limited contract. And there's limited contact and mixing, but you have to pay them for as long as they are kept in business. Paying less means less engagement in the work. Policies on COVID are very unpredictable. I am wondering if the Ministry of Labor is considering any shifts in favor of SMEs. Maybe I'll direct this to Mr. Musukwa and say if you can answer it live and share some of the strategies that you had for SMEs. I think you mentioned it somewhere in your presentation, just briefly, before we take on other questions as well.
Sorry, I haven't gotten very clear the question. Can you repeat?
I think I'll read the last part because that seems to be the most relevant, and that is, I am wondering if the Ministry of Labor is considering any shifts in favor of SMEs. Maybe what are some of the strategies that you have put in place to assist SMEs, aside from safeguarding the employees that they have?
So the shift is the word SHIFT?
Yes.
Is it in policy?
Pardon?
Sorry, the shift that is being referred to, perhaps if I had read the question, it would have helped. But I wanted shift, is it talking about policy shift of government?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much. Right now, and in fact, even today, we had a meeting, and one of the issues that we discussed was on formalization of the informal sector or informal economy. And that means a lot, because if the informal sector is to be formalized, it means providing a more favorable business environment so that they are able to grow, they are able to develop, they are able to do better. And we are guided on this one by a very recent international labor standard called transition, it's a recommendation called transition from the informal to the formal economy. And in that regard, we have to work very, very closely with the ministries of industry as well as Ministry of Trade. And then I think a project funded by EU has just delayed, which is actually addressing that issue of formalization of the informal sector. And there are a number of issues. Of course, for the ministry, we're focusing on improving issues of safety and health, issues of greater compliance with labor standards, while trade and industry, which is main implementer, will be looking at the business side. And then we also have the training aspect by SMED, Medium Enterprise Institute, as well as TVETA. So that's what I would say broadly. but the commencement of the project has delayed because of COVID. It should have been rolled out by now, by early January. So it has been postponed, and we haven't yet received communication on when it is going to commence. So there is a lot that actually government would want to do to improve the informal sector, where most of these MSC, small and medium enterprises, are operating. But as of now, I can't say exactly how it is going to be done. Of course, we worked on our plans, Ministry of Labor and Ministry of Trade. So that's what I would say, that really we are doing something about it, and it is in recognition of the fact that 89% of the labor force is in the informal sector. So you can imagine only 11% is in the formal sector. That's why we are very, very concerned. But I hope in the few coming months, more information will come out, and there will be greater engagement with you people. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for taking that live. Yeah, go ahead, Maria.
I was going to say, I think one of the things that's really important that SMEs can do, and individual business owners, is be proactive to engage the relevant authorities when you have challenges. I think that sometimes we fall into non-compliance when we can be proactive and actually go either to the Department of Labor and say, this is the situation we find ourselves in. We may not be conversant with understanding the legal parameters. How can you help us that we manage the situation that we have in a way that keeps us compliant? So you're now being proactive and using the authorities, using the Department of Labor, for example, to help you to understand this, because we have to appreciate with a lot of SMEs, what I found is that many can't afford a high level HR function within their organizational structure. So oftentimes you have someone who does administration, who does payroll, but they may not be able to interpret some of those instruments very well. So sometimes I think that one of the things that we can do to help ourselves is be proactive. And then maybe when you go there, you can be directed to other places where you can get the support. That's one. The second thing I wanted to mention is with regards to taxes. When you do your contract renegotiations, if those people are within a tax paying band, you need to then communicate also to the Revenue Authority to say, we have reorganized ourselves, we've reduced hours, we've done this, these are the new contracts we've offered people, so that your tax obligation reflects the reality of where you're working now. Because if you fail to do that, your tax obligation will remain at the level it was when you registered for payee. So if you're registered for payee, keep that in mind. Even if you're reducing salaries to a level where people are now within that tax-free band of 100,000 Malawi kwacha, you still need to go to MRA and say, we were paying 150,000, now we are paying 100,000. So actually for these particular employees, we will no longer have a payee obligation based on these new contracts. So that also is important for us to be able to do. So again, be proactive so that you're not then suffering the punishment and the correction at the same time. You'd rather have the correction and the right guidance up front. And I find that the offices are very receptive. The labor office, even the tax office, they're very receptive. Obviously, another thing is we have to have integrity. We can't say we've reduced everybody's salary to below the tax band just because we're trying to avoid paying tax. That's lack of integrity. But where we need support and we need guidance, I think we can proactively approach some of these facilities and figure out how they can help us. So also it's about being proactive. Go out there and look for the help that you need, rather than wait to see what government is coming up with.
Okay, thank you so much, Maria. It seems like the next question is actually for you, and it will be the last question that we'll be taking today. So this question is from Moses Nirenda, and he's asking, thanks, Maria, for your presentation on how to manage difficult conversations. How best do you handle emotional reactions from employees? Because some employees can be very aggressive.
I think that's a very, very good question. And I think that the important thing is to probably have a process that you follow within, as you have these conversations. So we're not going to suddenly have a conversation about, oh, by the way, business is bad, you're fired. There's going to be a very negative reaction to that. So I think what is useful is to stagger the communications and begin the communications from the time that the crisis began. And this early part of the year is a really good opportunity for you to say, okay, guys, I want us to just have a review meeting where we're looking at how the business fared last year during the crisis. What are some of the challenges? What is the outlook for this year? What is cash flow looking like? So it gives people a background of where things are coming from and what the trajectory has been. And also gives them a sense that you as a leader have taken time to really reflect, to do the proper analysis and so forth before you've come up with decisions. So I think that's one. So give people an opportunity to understand the background of things, give people information, give people data, give people statistics, at least so that they see. It doesn't change the fact that the reactions will be emotional, but it's important that we give people that information so that people can start digesting it. And then the second piece is when you do have the conversation with the employee and employees are aggressive, I think that's where now you need to make use of, I think, security, but not to respond aggressively. A lot of the times, I think it's about appreciating that people are going to be upset, appreciating that people are affected, and therefore that emotion is justified. But obviously, when it becomes extreme, then you need to take some security measures. But appreciate that people are going to be emotional about it. No one is going to smile when they're told that they're getting a pay cut or that they're likely going to lose their job and their livelihoods, etc. So appreciate that and understand it, and try not to respond to it, because a lot of the times what happens is the emotion will be directed at you because you're the object of the message. So the emotion is directed at you. Your job is not to respond emotionally and to process and understand that this person is responding to the situation and the emotion is directed at the situation, but not at me. So my role as a leader in this is to understand that the emotions are natural and not also react emotionally, allow them to express that emotion and then give them the opportunity to calm down. So I think those would be the tips, is understand that the emotion is not directed at you personally. Try not to tap in or feed into that emotion by responding emotionally yourself. Appreciate that that emotion is going to happen, allow people to process it, and then respond. And don't try also, if someone gets extremely emotional and extremely aggressive, don't try and push the conversation. Sometimes it's good to take a step back and say, I understand that you are emotional right now, this is shock, maybe go home, take time to process it, and then we can pick up this conversation tomorrow or another day. Because again, when you try sometimes to push hard a conversation when someone is not emotionally and mentally in the right space, I think it adds to the aggression, it fuels the fire. So if it's possible to de-escalate by, putting off the conversation, that's fine. But if it's possible to just allow that emotion to process and allow it to calm down, and you de-escalate it in that way, and then you continue the conversation.
All right, thank you very much, Maria, for answering that question. I think that was very informative. We have a number of comments in the chat box sharing their thoughts. Amazing point on emotional intelligence. That's Ngawa Chatata sharing some of the thoughts, and it's Maria, that is powerful. I love the bit about understanding perceived distinction on the employee's part between equity and salary. Another one from Lumbani saying, big up Maria, that's true. So I think a lot of people on this call were able to resonate with some of the points that were shared by Mr. Musukwa and yourself, Maria. Thank you so much for engaging us. I would like to take us into the final segment of our conversation today and call upon Esther Nyaucho to just share with us some closing remarks, and then I will close us off for the evening. Esther?
Yeah, You've disabled my video first, but in the meantime, there's a question from, I think, Sandy. I don't know who can take that. Maybe Mr. Musukwa.
I'm actually responding to it in type.
Ah, perfect. Then I won't worry about it. Okay, great. So
Video again.
hi. There we go. Hi, everyone. Name is Esther. I think Poster introduced me earlier. So I want to thank everyone, I think, for the engagement. The Growth Accelerator, we've really, I think, struggled and thought about how can we keep the entrepreneurs engaged as well as the wider ecosystem, and I think have some of these practical conversations that are beyond necessary for growing businesses. So as Maria was talking and Mr. Musukwa, I think what I jotted down was really about being an empathic leader. That's your job. That's part of what you're doing as an entrepreneur. Otherwise, run a business by yourself. But as soon as you have people, you need to think about them as human beings. Vulnerability. I think for those who have gone through the program, we spend like a solid week discussing leadership, discussing vulnerability as a leader, and how important that is, so that the humanity in you, I think, fully comes out in your business, and then how you interact with your employees. And last but not least, I think it's just about understanding basics that are required of you. So a lot of SMEs overlook the legal stuff, put it in the back burner and say they'll deal with it later. But later is gonna bite you and be very expensive, and then be just very difficult to recover from. So I think it's your onus to do it. We are here to help. Please don't hesitate to reach out to anyone from the Growth Accelerator team. I think you have our general email, as well as I think you have our individual email addresses. So should you have some challenges, preempt it. If there is something that you're foreseeing, we can try and help you find resources. We may not have them in our own toolbox, but someone else has them, and we can help you try and find that resource. Someone like, say, Mr. Musukwa to just answer some of these legal questions. Someone like Maria, I don't know where it is, or maybe it's about having some of those contract templates, that kind of thing. So please, I can't urge you enough, reach out before the problem is a much bigger problem. And we can brainstorm and see how to help each other. How can you have these conversations? I think, Moses, that's a great question. How to have difficult conversations. It's both a challenge in our personal lives as well as business. So we can't get away from it, and we must have it, especially as leaders in our businesses. So thanks so much, everyone, I think, for the active participation. I think we have, really good attendance here. And Yolanda will share the recording for anyone who's interested. Thank you so much to our panelists. Maria, we've met several times. It's really good to see you. Unfortunately, Mr. Musukwa, we haven't met, but hopefully we will very soon. And for the rest of the team, Titus, Yolanda, everyone else, thanks so much. So should you have additional questions regarding this topic, I think maybe Yolanda, I think post in the various group chats or even on the Facebook Live where people can direct their questions, should they have additional questions regarding this topic. And we'll see maybe compiling a simple FAQ and sharing that out as well. Cheers. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Esther. I'm going to do a final call to everyone, final call to action. If you have suggestions for some of the topics that you would like us to talk about on this platform, some conversations that we can convene the quickest fingers. Please do share some of the topics that you're thinking of in the chat box, and we'll be sure to make a consideration to arrange such a conversation. The recording of this call will be made available, and I will be compiling some of the questions that were left unanswered. And be sure to provide an answer. We will be sharing it on our Facebook page, as well as creating a Twitter thread where some of these questions can also be answered. So be sure to interact with us on our social media pages. On Twitter, we are Grow Malawi, and on Facebook, we're also Grow Malawi. So that being said, I'd like to announce to all of you that the next event is actually scheduled for the 11th of March, 2021, and we are going to be talking about mental health for business owners. So we're able to talk about employees and how to deal with the legal aspect of all of this, but we do not want to forget the mental health of entrepreneurs. So if you do want to join us, please have a look out on our Facebook and Twitter pages. We will be sharing the event flyer and hosting another conversation like this one on the 11th of March. To my team, do we have any thoughts that we would like to share? Okay, nothing from Titus, nothing from Vincent, nothing from Olga. I would like to extend a very big thank you to Maria and Mr. Musukwa for being on this call with us. Thank you so much for taking the time to engage with SMEs and make them a little bit more knowledgeable about how to deal with their employees. I'm pretty sure everyone has taken some notes that they're going to implement as soon as possible in their businesses. All right, thank you so much for everyone. I will be closing off this event now. You are free to log off.